Good evening and good afternoon, most well-read legends of finance, and good morning to those of you who are joining us from the Americas. Welcome to our inaugural book club. My name is Regina Geisina, and I am here tonight on behalf of Collaborative WIM Steering Committee. So first, I wanted to thank all the people who made this event possible. Obviously, all of you for participating. Takes a village to make a village. Our sponsors and our hosts at CFA Society Ukraine. And of course, all of our volunteers and voluntold for their really hard work on this event. So I know for many of you, this is your first book club. So first, let's talk about for a second what to expect. If you have read the book, great, you're way ahead of the curve. You are officially a legend, but still only in your own mind. But yes, you are set for today. Well, if you haven't read the book, don't worry, we're not going to take away your charter. We're not going to report you for breaching the code of conduct and showing up to class without doing the homework. All jokes aside, though, what are we really here for this afternoon? Well, we're here to meet our peers from all over the globe and network and talk about the power of critical thinking and how it affects our daily lives. And then later on, we have an opportunity to ask Vikram his thoughts on the subject. And thereafter, you can read for yourself if you haven't done so yet. So I know all of you are finance professionals and you have no problem providing your solicited and unsolicited opinions. So I know you're going to do great in the breakout rooms. For those of you hitting the happy hour, book pairs well with Rosé, who said we can't read between the wines. But without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Anna to go over some housekeeping items.
Thank you so much, Regina. So some organizational things before we start. Very shortly, we will divide you in the separate breakout rooms to make our discussions friendly in the small groups. To get to the breakout sessions, please do nothing, just relax. Events hosts will do it for you by themselves. So please ensure you're muted while you're not talking during the whole event, just not to make some additional noise to the sessions. In the breakout rooms, we encourage, even now, we encourage you to turn on your cameras to see you, to feel you're here with us. You will have 45 minutes for the discussion within the breakout rooms, and then we will push you back to the main session. After the discussion, you will have a chance to meet the author of the book, Vikram. So please make sure you stay tuned. During the session with Vikram, please stay muted as well. You are welcome to ask your questions using the chat box sessions, or please just use raise a hand tool to address your questions by voice. In case of any additional organizational things, please just use this chat box and any of the hosts and co-hosts here to answer all your questions. Thank you so much for joining us. It is a great pleasure for us to be the host of this first inaugural session here in the EMEA region.
Thank you, Anna. All right, folks, so before we go into the breakout rooms to network, let's break some ice here and do a quick poll to get to know each other just a little better. So let's get the poll up. All right, for those of you who rely on the GPS, you are not going to be my tour guide to my next trip to Siberia, that's for sure. Those of you who question Siri, please stay after the class for additional questioning. But as you folks go into the breakout rooms, please ask your peers what do they do and how do they lose on a daily basis their mind to technology, or tell them, what was your most recent adventure that GPS took you on? Were you walking around the building for an hour mindlessly? With that, please go ahead and enjoy. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the breakout rooms. So first, I wanted to say, once we're done with this Q&A portion, please don't run away and stick around for a second. I know you all found your newly critical thinking skills and you're ready to go and question your significant others, your boss, every model you've ever done. But we do have a few announcements and a quick survey at the end. But with that, I wanted to welcome again our very, very special guest, Dr. Mansharamani. Vikram, thank you for joining us today. We are so thrilled to have you. And folks, as you are starting to throw in the questions in the chat or getting ready to raise your hand, I wanted to start with, asking you with what made you decide to write this book?
It's a great question, Regina. So first of all, thank you guys for having me. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I always love the CFA societies. I've interacted with dozens and dozens of CFA societies all over the world. I've spoken at multiple annual conferences. It's always a very intellectually stimulating group. So I'm always honored to be invited. So thank you. It's a great question, Regina, and you probably don't even realize how great a question it is. Because it actually might have been a CFA event that spurred this. So I was giving a talk about my first book, which was about financial bubbles. I gave the talk, and the essence of my first book was, the way you spot a financial bubble is you look through multiple lenses and you get a probabilistic assessment that goes up if more lenses say the same thing. That's it. I used some case studies, came up with a framework. And at the end of it, there was an older gentleman, I think he was in his late 80s, early 90s, who came up to me. It might have been a CFA event, might not have been, I don't remember, but it was about finance. And he says, Dr. Vikram, I'd love to keep in touch. Here's my card. I said, certainly, sir, please, here's my card. And I thought nothing of it. And a year and a half later, 2 years later, he came back and emailed me. And then he also followed up with a phone call. And he said, I want to thank you. I said, okay, about what? He said, well, your lenses and your approach from boom bustology and your thinking process helped me and my wife navigate a cancer diagnosis. And I said, what? He said, yes. I said, I was writing about finance. He said, no, you're not. You're writing about navigating uncertainty. That's what multiple lenses help you do. It helps you triangulate through uncertainty. And I thought about it for a while. And then I went back and I took a couple years as a senior fellow at the Kennedy School. I said, all right, let me do this on the side for at least a day or two a week. I'll give myself some time to think about this topic. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually this logic of being a generalist does help you navigate uncertainty. And the output of that reflection after that first book, I thought I'd be one book and done. That's it. Never write another book in my life. And here, of course, I've written this one now, but it was spurred by that. That was the caused me to go back and think, am I writing about something bigger than I think I am? And the answer was, I do. I think I am. I thought I was writing about navigating uncertainty, which is the essence of what I pay attention to. So anyway, thank you. Good question.
All right. So we got another one. Hi, Vikram. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. I do have a question to pick your brain. If grit from Angela Duckworth is the secret to outstanding achievement, what would you say is the core of Think for Yourself? It's actually a great question.
Yeah. So I actually think empathy. If I had to summarize what I'm suggesting, now, I don't think my publishers or editors would appreciate this summary because empathy, at least for business books, is deemed kind of soft, right? Oh, empathy. What is empathy? Empathy is the essence of adopting somebody else's perspective. And so it's allowing you to see what they see and maybe also help you appreciate what you're seeing, rather than making all these assumptions. Empathy helps you unveil the assumptions that you may have preordained. It helps you surface stereotypes. Because of empathy, you seek diversity, because diversity is multiple perspectives. Multiple perspectives are sort of additional forms of empathy brought to the table. So in sort of a raw root sense, what I'm suggesting is getting some other perspectives. That's the essence of thinking for yourself, is triangulation. It's not relying individually on one data point, but seeing the mosaic and then deciding for yourself what is important, because you have your context. You're the only one who will understand your body and your health needs. You're the only one who understands your financial situation, your financial goals, your objectives, your risk tolerance, etc. You're the only one who understands the context in which experts give you advice. So paying attention to the context and understanding other perspectives, that's really what I would say. Sorry about the long-winded.
No, it's great. I mean, yeah, empathy maybe is like part of the self-compassion, right? In a way here seems like appropriate, because we oftentimes question ourselves and, just rely blindly on those experts, and empathy and self-compassion might just allow us to look outside there.
Yeah, because also, Virginia, what happens is you realize that every perspective is limited, every perspective is biased, and every perspective is incomplete. Therefore, this expert who has this opinion that's telling you you must do it this way, you realize, well, actually, that's not gospel. That's just another perspective. And my perspective is equally valid. Might not be as informed if it's very technical, might not be as useful if it's very specific, but it's valid and I have something to bring to the table. And then discretion, mindfulness brought to bear could help you make a better decision.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Another question. Do you have advice for, all right. There's going to be a few, my apologies. Okay. Do you have advice for inculating the ideas from your book in our children and families more broadly?
Yeah, look, I think, Daniel, that's a great question. The thing I suggest is, again, if we go back to the empathy, is always to catch. I have a couple of kids, and so anytime they make an assumption about something, I'm like, wait, why do you think that? Well, that person must have. No, not must have. Maybe they think differently. Why are you making that operating assumption? Someone cuts you off, you're driving your car, some other person, oh, that person's horrible, totally. Well, you might not believe it, but maybe that person is in a genuine rush. Maybe they have to get to a hospital. Maybe there's some other problem. So maybe you don't have to make it always about you. So I think part of it is just sort of teaching kids to see the bigger picture, to explore alternative explanations. So that's one thing for children. And then, with family dynamics, that's always hard, right? Because there's always some personality quirk or this or that, or this person thinks this person thinks that. But I think if you can help just that basic appreciation that everybody's perspective is limited, incomplete, and biased, means that everybody's perspective is valid at some level, right? It may not be complete, but it's valid. And so, trying to include other people's opinions. And then the last thing I say, which is, I give this advice to corporations also, but it's equally valid, I think, for families. When thinking about a tough, big decision, should we move? Should we go to, where are we going for vacation? Something like that. It's not a choice if you don't have alternatives, right? So I always say, the corporate boardroom equivalent is go get a devil's advocate. Get someone whose job it is to say, no, that's the wrong decision. So you can do that in a family, right? I mean, we pass the buck around our family, right? Where we want to go on vacation. All right, you want to go to Africa? Great. So someone's job is to say why Africa is a bad idea. Like, it's kind of a fun thing. Like, I mean, my son will be like, it's horrible. There's disease. There's this. So that's true. There's disease here. Right? It's everywhere. Right. And so, but then you actually get to have meaningful conversations about things like that and debate. And when you can get debate, then you can make a decision. Without debate, there's probably no decision to be made.
I totally agree on this devil's advocate thing, and make me think about, why don't we have in those rooms, full of senior analysts, senior portfolio managers, maybe a junior, right, without the background, who's more of a generalist, question it, right? We get the folks to kind of get out of their comfort zone first, and then question all the senior people, because we all tend to succumb to the groupthink and really agree with each other.
So interestingly, Virginia, you're raising raising two related but different issues. And I want to just disentangle them quickly, because at least the way I view it, number one, you're talking about sort of this idea of fresh, independent thinking, right? The fresh eyes, the generalist, the young, the person who has not been sort of indoctrinated with the basic operating assumptions that a group may adopt and subversively or subconsciously just imbues everything they do. They assume this will be the case, right? And so having a junior person come involved in a group is always useful, because they bring that fresh eyes perspective. And I've talked a little bit about that in the book. But then the devil's advocate need not be junior, right? In fact, I would suggest that you take a senior person and you rotate in a group, and have the senior person's job is to say why this is a bad decision, because then there's a competitive, even playing field. You don't want the senior person, you're just young and inexperienced. Let me tell you, you're wrong. Because then you're not giving the appropriate weight to that devil's advocate position. But if a senior person shows up and says, nope, this is wrong, and don't make it personal, give that in a group dynamic, alternate, say this person's job, before we even know what the decision is, this is our devil's advocate. Okay, that person is going to be resourced and tasked with finding the reasons why we should not do something. So that's healthy, because now it's not personal. I'm not mad at you, Regina, because you're the one always saying that I say yes, you say no, I say up, you say down, I say in, you say out. I say, she's really rude. I don't like her. But if it alternates, it's you this week, it's Anna next week, it's Sarah the week after, it's Natalia the week after, I can't really blame. Then it's a functional capability introduced to the group, and therefore it gets productive, additive, and helpful. So I think it's important to disentangle the fresh eyes and devil's advocate, because I think they're related, but they're different. And the key is to unveil assumptions that you might subconsciously be making. But no, look, I'm often brought in as an outsider to play the devil's advocate role. So I'm playing both roles there, right? In the sense that I'm the fresh eyes because I'm not the insider, but I'm also coming in tasked by a board of directors to evaluate something. And so I can interface as a, with senior executives with the authority of the board behind me, right? So, so it does work. You can combine the two, but they're distinct issues. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for kind of, taking it one step further. Those are all great. All right, so another question from Natalia. What would be your advice for us keeping our minds open to new information, being curious, and becoming a better generalist?
Yeah, so I think that there's sort of a couple of things. Number one, read broadly and diversify your media diet. That's the other ways I describe it, is right. So oftentimes we all tend to focus on roughly the same information sources, right? My guess is if you're in the equity business, you're probably reading, watching, listening to Bloomberg, maybe CNBC. There's a couple of sources that you're definitely using. How many of you are going and seeing the fringy, extreme sources of information that you might naturally dismiss as fringy? Maybe they're too conservative. Okay, I'm not telling you to agree with them. I'm saying, go listen, get that perspective. Then go to the fringy liberal side. Let's go to the socialist. Let's go to the whatever perspective. Get a range of perspectives with a diversified media. That's going to help you be a generalist and to be able to navigate the terrain of understanding what is out there, as opposed to being stuck in the consensus center, right? So I'm not telling you to agree with the extremes. I'm telling you to appreciate the extremes, because then you'll understand the gradations that exist. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of being curious and I do this in the form of navigating uncertainty, and it's more than curiosity. It's probably more creativity and imagination, but they're all related. Is I really encourage people to read fiction. Read fiction. My guess is, as CFA charter holders, many of you are type A, reading nonfiction. Many of you have a list of books you're trying to get through, academic articles you want to read, research you want to understand, and fiction. Who has time for fiction? Well, actually, fiction unveils assumptions, right? So one book I read, it must have been almost 10 years ago, was a book called 1 Second After. And it's not a great novel, but it's a novel. It's fiction written by a military historian, but it's about an electromagnetic pulse attack that hits the United States, and it's drama, and the person has, you know, a child with diabetes, and insulin can't be refrigerated, and then there's a competition, and there's all sorts of drama. But it made me think differently about, wait, are we all just assuming electricity will always be here? Or is it, where are these vulnerabilities that we haven't thought through? Like, how do I get more diversified in thinking about it? I think it made me a better generalist to sort of diversify, zoom out, and see broader dynamics and to connect dots. So I do think fiction feels indulgent to many professionals. Beach reading, I'm on vacation, now I can read fiction, but it need not be. I read at least 1 or 2 fiction books a month, period. I insist on it. Now I tend to read 3 or 4 nonfiction books also per month. And I have the structural flexibility. This is my job. I'm digesting information, making it. That's what I do. So I understand it sounds like, you know, oh, if I had time to read 5 books, of course I would read 1 fiction one. But I do think you can all include some fiction in your life. And I think it'd be healthy, helpful, and useful career-wise.
Yeah, and you know, we know that a lot of innovators at the Silicon Valley, they are fans of fiction, right? This is how you know, it really sparks the creativity. I mean, we talk about Elon Musk and some other folks. I mean, they really are the fans of reading, you know, fiction in their free time.
Yep, that's right. And of course, Regina, there's science fiction, which a lot of people do, and space and all that stuff gets inspired in some ways by science fiction. But I'm also comfortable with just reading all fiction. The human condition gets described in useful ways. It unveils assumptions. It makes you rethink. It helps you ultimately empathize. You get a different perspective, particularly if you get really lost in a good book, you will come away with a different perspective.
Well, so for all the CFA charter holders here, a little challenge, War and Peace by the end of the month, all right? In your free time.
That's a big one. That's a big bite. I agree. You don't need to do that.
Okay, so another question here from the audience. Hi, Vikram. Would you have any tip on how to approach fields where the amount of knowledge is overwhelming, quite difficult to challenge experts' view and genuinely building one's own opinion?
Yeah, so by the way, that's true in a lot of fields, right? So the question always is not whether you should listen to an expert. To some extent, it's when should you be listening to an expert versus when you shouldn't be. So let's use an example from a medical field. You have a headache. Are you going to a neurosurgeon when you have a headache? Presumably not. Presumably you start with a general internist and you say, oh, I have a headache. What's the problem? Are you dehydrated? Are your diet off? Have you not been getting appropriate sleep? We can check and see, do you also have a fever? There's a protocol, but you're not starting with an expert there. You're starting with a generalist. Then you can say, all right, now we've determined, unfortunately, God forbid this doesn't happen to anyone, but we have a brain tumor. Okay, now we don't care for the generalist. Now I want the specialist. We got a problem. We know the problem. It's not navigating uncertainty. We have a certain problem we've identified, we're aware of. Now we want to solve this problem. Now we need the expert, the deep specialist expert. So part of the question is when you refer to who. But you're right. In many fields, the information is overflowing and overwhelming that you can't feel like you can be on even playing ground. I'm not asking you to be on even playing ground. I'm asking you to feel comfortable asking questions. You have an appreciation for where the knowledge may be pertinent to your life or where it isn't. And so you can ask a doctor, all right, doctor, you know, what is I understand you're recommending I do this. It's based on what? Why do you think that? That's not threatening. That's not challenging. That's asking. And so you can do it respectfully. You can ask in a way that helps you get informed, etc. And also, by the way, you can do it as a devil's advocate. You're on your own with information seeking. So for instance, a lot of people say, oh, my doctor said I should take Lipitor to lower my cholesterol. And every doctor is taking Lipitor. And so you go home and you can Google search the benefits of Lipitor and you get the list. Same thing that your doctor told you. But what if you went online and said, why shouldn't I take Lipitor? Or what's wrong with statins? Risks. Focus on the stuff that people don't focus on so you can get a better. Doesn't mean you're not going to take Lipitor. It just means you'll be more informed in understanding what people are saying about why you shouldn't. So seek disconfirming evidence and ask lots of questions when you interface with an expert that has a lot more information. But you can do it respectfully in a way that makes it collaborative, where you're just trying to help yourself get smarter. And if you play, I mean, sometimes there's ego involved here, but if there is, then you play to that as a source of advantage, right? Oh, I'm so thrilled that I have, doctor, it's amazing. You're the world's expert of this, but like, I'm trying to get myself up to speed to understand the right issues. Where do you recommend someone like me begin with getting smarter on these topics? I want to understand why you think what you think. I want to get into it. This obviously is very important and personal to me, but I'd like to get, a little bit deeper in understanding. How do you recommend I do that?
Well, we have a question from a fellow educator, actually. They're wondering if you have any go-to exercise or interactive workshop that you use in your classroom to encourage students to think for themselves.
Yeah, so one of the things I've done a lot of is I've used a, well, first of all, if you haven't done the selective inattention test, which is, it's I'm going to ruin it for everyone by describing it, but I hate doing this, but that's okay. If you haven't seen it, there's a video where people pass basketballs, and there's a bunch of people walking around, they're passing basketballs, and you have to count the number of times the basketball gets passed. And so you have everybody focus on counting the basketballs, and they count the number of times the basketball gets passed. Then you say, okay, let's try it with the counting the basketballs being passed by air versus bounced basketballs. Then you say different color shirts, there's different exercises. Anyway, that's not really the test. The test is whether they're paying attention to the context or whether they're actually focused on what you ask them to. And when they focus on counting the balls, what they do is they get the number usually accurate, pretty close. Sometimes they're off by one, but basically they're right. But in the middle of this scene, while they're passing the basketballs, there is a gorilla, person dressed in a gorilla outfit, who comes in the middle and starts just going like this in the middle of the scene. And half the people miss it. Half the people miss it when the basic count the number of passes. When you add complexity to count the number of passes being bounced versus the passes being sent by air, more people miss it. When you add on more cognitive burden on them, you find that they stop thinking or stop looking at the whole picture. So that's kind of a fun thing if you haven't done it in a classroom, where it's a video, it's a YouTube, you can look it up. I mean, there's a book written about it, the gorilla, what was it, the missing invisible gorilla. I forget the title of the book, but anyway, there's a book about it. There's obviously a lot video. It's a world famous experiment, and it's long ago now that my students at least aren't familiar with it. If you go down young enough, they don't know about the stuff that happened earlier. And so that's a fun one because it really gets people to, it jars them into thinking, oh, hold on a second. I've been overly channeled in where I'm focused my thinking. And actually the bigger picture, sometimes I need to look broader, wider, and zoom out. So.
Yeah, the bouncing ball gorilla experiment is phenomenal. Absolutely.
Really catchy. I mean, it's old and it's famous, but it's useful for students. I think it works.
Well, it also reminds me of the experiment in the elevator. I don't remember. It's, a little old, right? Where kind of everyone turns one way and the person who was like turned the other way, although they're facing like just the wall, not actually the doors of the elevator. They think that because it's a group thing, right? They also like turn themselves slowly to face the wall. Although, normally in an elevator, you would be facing the other way around. So just kind of think for yourself, right? You don't have to always go with the group. Yeah,
although I think today, I think with COVID, maybe that more people are doing the facing the wall. Because they want to hide their mouth, right? So you never know. Anyway.
Yeah. Sarah looks like he has a question for you.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Vikram. It's so good to meet you. I was one of the lucky winners who ended up in Vikram's breakout room. So I have a two-part question for you. So the first part is, obviously the world is incredibly uncertain right now. There's a lot of unprecedented things that are happening. And so I'm just kind of curious, given your perspectives, what are your reflections on what you're seeing and what keeps you up at night? And the second part related to that, or maybe not, is what's the next book that you're working on that we should keep an eye out for?
Sure. Well, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for the great questions. The first thing that keeps me up at night, I will tell you, and this is a lot of the more traditionally when I speak to CFA groups, it's usually about global economics or trends or dynamics relating to what's happening in the economy or financial markets. And I think what keeps me up at night right now is this US-China rivalry and the risk of meaningful escalation heading from what is today, I would call definitely a gray zone conflict, possibly a non-kinetic war today, escalating into a traditional full kinetic hot war. I think there's a rising risk of that. I think even the news that came out this morning, the US is selling Taiwan more military equipment. I mean, these are tense times when it comes to US-China relations. And, you know, a lot of times we dismiss this as this was a trade war. Oh, this was a intellectual property war, or this was a currency war, or this is a tech race, or this is a space race, or this is a, you know, et cetera. It's all of the above, right? And when it's all of the above, what we're talking about as a generalist might think about this is great power rivalry. This is great power rivalry. And we haven't seen much of it in the last, call it post Cold War. We haven't really seen this, but this is usually the way the world works. There's a rival that's trying to be the superpower, and maybe there's a multipolar world, maybe there's a unipolar world, who knows? But this is a transition, i.e. a rising superpower against an entrenched superpower that is not without risk. And this can affect all of us in everything we do. So that's one thing that really does keep me up at night, Sarah. I watch that closely. I watch the fact that, you know, we see, again, what's happening with Taiwan as a flashpoint. I am paying attention to what's happening in Western China with Xinjiang and East Turkestan, depending upon your perspective, what's happening there. I do watch what's happening with Hong Kong. And of course, you know, Taiwan's a wild card. I worry about the Olympics next year being a catalyst for escalation. Rather than de-escalation, which is, I think, the original intent of the Olympics, right? To de-escalate and find common ground in sport. But if it results in finding reasons to protest and, you know, escalate, yeah, I worry about how those things come into play on challenge that dynamic of US-China relations, how it comes into play on some things where we need to collaborate. I mean, climate change doesn't know borders. How do we deal with a competitive dynamic where collaboration is necessary? Is it possible? And by the way, I'm sort of uncertain / unclear, maybe even negative on the prospect of collaborating in one domain while competing in another, because great power rivalry really is a values war. It's a war on values. And you might even get back to the point, is this an individual versus community value focus, right? I mean, sort of the Asian community focus versus a Western individualism focus. So anyway, that is a really big, heavy thoughts, and apologies for going there, but Sarah asked, so happy to talk more about it. And it does relate at some level to the concept of a potential next book. This is the focus of my work, is navigating US-China relations and all my consulting and speaking work. I have a lot, I talk about a lot of stuff we get into there. But in terms of the next book idea, I've been asked to write a book on US-China relations, and I've been following China relations since I was an undergrad, I studied Chinese back in the early 90s. So it's been 30 years of thinking about and paying attention to China and those dynamics. But so that's one possibility. Another one is group decision making rather than individual decision making. So think for ourselves rather than think for yourself. If you imagine sort of a group dynamic that has some nuance and differences than individual decision making. And so, those are a couple of the ideas that are percolating, unclear which, if any, will make it up to the list of to do. But right now I'm actually just enjoying a little bit of downtime, enjoying the consulting and reconnecting work that's happening, because I'm now back out able to go see groups and stuff. So. Great question, Sarah. Thank you.
All right, folks, we'll take one more question from the audience. If anyone wants to send something into the chat or raise your hand. All right, Victoria.
Hi, Vikram. I was kind of thinking about your whole idea of navigating uncertainty, and my question is kind of related to what Sarah just mentioned, after all of us have gone through this period of, 18 months of uncertainty, and you've been such a critical thinker, I was wondering if you have noticed maybe something that helped you to go through this better, or maybe some skills that you have learned for yourself that help you to get through it, that maybe some of us can benefit as well from as we continue to navigate this environment.
No, it's a great question, Victoria. And in fact, since we're here talking in theory about the book, let me share a story about the book, because I think that might make this personal, relevant, and it's on topic, so to say. But so this book was scheduled to get released in June of 2020. For anyone who's written a book or understands the book business, all the publicity efforts really are channeled to the 3 months prior to book release. And I had, 25 speaking engagements teed up between March and the end of the summer. And they were all organized with book sales, book promotion, book everything. This was a multi-year effort to do the book. It was sort of culminating in the book release. In fact, I was speaking at the CFA Institute annual conference, May of 2020. I did it virtually, but this was a big buildup, and it came with it a lot of media. It had a huge, wonderful plan. It would have been a New York Times #1 bestseller based on, highly likely to have been, based on what we knew were contracted book buys at large events, media, publication, etc. And all of it fell apart in front of my eyes beginning in March of 2020. I was genuinely depressed, honestly. I was downright beaten up. I was, and a dear friend of mine who had read the manuscript, he's someone I've known for 40 years. He says to me, Vikram, you got to take your own advice here. There's a bigger picture here. You got to look broader, you got to look wider. And so he said, why don't you have one meaningful conversation with someone in your network every week? Just do it on Zoom, whatever. And I said, okay, great. And so I took his advice. He calls me up the next week. He says, who are you talking to this week? I said, I'm going to talk to my friend, Dr. Ali Khan. He come to my class. I've read his book. We've shared ideas. I've been in his office when I'm in Nebraska. He wrote a book called The Next Pandemic. And this was April of 2020. And so my friend says to me, he says, can I eavesdrop? Can I listen in? I said, what do you mean listen in? He said, I want to listen in on your conversation. I'll hide my video on Zoom. Let me just listen. This is an important guy. I said, it's not what I want. It's weird. So he says, just ask him. Said, okay, Dr. Khan, do you mind if I invite a friend or two? I said, no problem. I'm happy to share. I want to get the word out. This is an important time. We're all uncertain. We don't know how to navigate uncertainty. And so I included him. I said, all right, let's do it as a Zoom webinar. And I invited a couple of friends. Those couple of friends invited a couple other friends, invited a couple other friends. Next thing you know, we had 200 people on this thing, and it turned into a webinar series. And I did it then with other guests that were mentioned in the book, et cetera. And all these webinars, by the way, are available on my website. You can find all the 2020 series there. But it started with the idea of, I got dealt a bunch of lemons. How can I make lemonade? And it was a twist of perspective. And it was encouraged by someone who had read my book telling me to adopt my own advice. And it proved really useful. And it taught me to be a little more resilient. It gave me a little more confidence to say, okay, maybe it's not what I thought it would be. Maybe it's not, the expectations are not where I'd hoped, but it'll still be good. It'll still have impact. I'll still get to get the ideas out there. And maybe it'll have a longer life if I do some of these webinar things. And by the way, I'm just going to have authentic, real conversations with my guests. I'm not going to overly produce these. We're not going to make it a fancy thing. This is just Vikram talking with people in his network and sharing to help others get a different perspective. And so I did that. I did 20 of them last year. I've done another 17 or 18 of them so far this year, with another 10, 15 to come. And you can find most of them on my website. It's just mansharamani.com. You'll find under content, there's webinars. I included 4-star generals. I had the most senior woman in the US military ever, General Lori Robinson. She came and spent an hour talking with me. I had obviously Dr. Khan. I had Trump's chief of staff, first chief of staff, because I'm non-political. I'm happy to learn from anyone and everyone. When the oil prices went negative, I called up one of the oil industry's best analysts and I said, Tom, I need you to get on with me. He said, sure, happy to talk, Vikram. Why not? I was like, I'm going to invite some friends too. Do you mind? And 200 friends are just going to eavesdrop if you don't mind. That worked well. And so it turned into a positive, and I continue to do it, and I don't care about audience anymore. Now I just do it to have conversations with people. And, we put the audio portion of the conversations up as podcasts, albeit with some lag, but they get up there. So that was my attempt to navigate uncertainty, Victoria, with the attempt to show a little resilience and a lesson I learned from that process, and hopefully make others a little more informed in the process by sharing what I learned. So.
Vikram, well, thank you so much. It has been an incredible pleasure and honor to chat with you, this afternoon. And I know a lot of folks here are coming from all walks of life and different parts of the world, are also very appreciative of this time with you. If you guys have not read the book, please, now after this, we highly suggest you do so and expend it versus reading another, earnings report.
Yeah.
Might be something different.
Yeah, and Regina, one thing I'll say, I was going to type in the chat, but I'm happy to just say, even I've also written a lot on general topics, broad ranging, wide, and they're all available. These pieces I've written between 800 and 1200 words, all available for free on my LinkedIn profile. It's just a little easier on LinkedIn. They format nicer. It's easier to see all the posts and articles there. And by all means, but I would love people to feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's what I'm trying to narrow down all these social things to one. That's the one I'm honing in on because it's useful for content, but there's a lot there too.
Well, thanks again, Vikram, and hopefully we'll see you back with us soon again, and other societies will get the opportunity to join the conversation and the chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Gina. Thanks everyone for including me. I'm thrilled to be here. Keep in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, folks. So before we let you go, as I have mentioned, we got a little survey coming up here. We want to know how we did, what we can improve, but we won't tell you. Even if you don't like what we did, you'll never know. So, so be as honest as you can. All right, folks. Well, thank you for participating. We appreciate that. Wanted to let you know that we do have a few other events planned this fall, so do follow us on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with any of the members of the collaborative WIM steering committee, as well as our volunteers who have generously donated their time to be with us tonight. And we do have our next book club scheduled for October 13th, and it will be hosted by CFA Society Edmonton and our friends at CFA Society Istanbul. And we will be featuring Andy Malinsky with his book Reach, talking about getting out of your comfort zone. Again, thank you all for participating, and we look forward to connecting with all of you in the future.